Hi, welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Rowan Bosworth-Davies, a former fraud squad detective with Scotland Yard, who now blogs, tweets, and speaks to audiences all over the UK. Rowan, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
It's great to be back, Max.
So at one point you were a bobby.
Oh, yeah, I was. I was a street policeman, copper.
And now, then you became a detective.
Yep.
And now, the reason I ask is because I got a very interesting email here from somebody who sent it to me. They sent an email to Scotland Yard, and they said, they made the point to Scotland Yard, HSBC was caught red-handed laundering hundreds of millions of dollars from Mexican drug cartels and terrorists. They were fined £1.2 billion by U.S. authorities. HSBC drug money facilitated the murder of many hundreds of people in Mexico, often by mass beheadings or by being burned alive. I'm sure the Metropolitan Police are actively investigating who in HSBC is responsible for this crime. When can I expect to hear that the Metropolitan Police have made arrests in relation to this outrage? And then they say, yes, you're getting your email. Now, the response from Scotland Yard was, we do not have jurisdiction in the UK. The Metropolitan Police only serves London. Therefore, I cannot take your request forward. You can contact Interpol, at which point this gentleman responds and says, thank you for responding, but the British bank HSBC is managed and controlled from the headquarters located at 8 Canada Square, Canary Wharf, in London Docklands Borough of Tower Hamlets. So what's going on here?
It does sound as if it's a major buck passing opportunity. That was buck
passing.
Buck passing.
Well, that definitely is a buck passing, okay, because but the citizen is concerned because his bank, his British bank, HSBC, is engaged in laundering Mexican drug money, cartel money. This is irrefutable. It's not an alleged crime. They admit to it, and they're causing thousands and thousands of people being headed and burned alive in Mexico. So he's concerned. Should the British people be concerned?
Yes, I think British people should be concerned. Of course they should. It's absolutely scandalous that this bank, and the point about it being headquartered here in Canada Square is absolutely spot on. And the Mexican bank, by the way, that did the laundering is 99.99% owned by another HSBC entity called HSBC Latin America, which in itself, in turn, is 99.99% owned by HSBC in London. So, yeah, it's
but
a
isn't
British,
this, you're a cop,
bank.
isn't this a racket?
Of course it's a racket. But the problem is that there have been built up around the procedures that exist in all this kind of investigative brouhaha we built up over the last few years, that I'm sure there are detectives at Scotland Yard who would love to get their teeth into HSBC. I'm absolutely convinced of it. The problem is that procedurally, as soon as they showed any sign of interest in investigating it, and they can investigate it, by the way, because part of our money laundering law says that we can investigate crimes in this country even though they were committed abroad, and we can investigate them as if they were committed in this country. So that isn't a problem.
But isn't there a bigger risk here, Ron, in that you're sending a mixed message to the population? So last year, for example, there were these riots in London, buildings were torched, and there was finger-pointing at those poor people who don't respect Britain. And yet at the same time, David Cameron and George Osborne don't respect the people of Britain by condoning, by authorizing, by failing to prosecute billions of dollars of the drug money laundering and mass murders on behalf of HSBC. So what is the population, who are they to believe? The words, the lies coming out of Cameron's mouth, or the truth that one amongst them, what are these, ASBOs, antisocial behavioral ordinances? People get these ASBOs, like they threw some garbage out their window on their council estate. Now they've got an ASBO. Meanwhile, HSBC, if they were in the House, they would have picked up a machete and chopped off the head of somebody in that council estate and laughed and sold that scrap for horse meat to a Findus lasagna. And they would not have been prosecuted. They would have been laughing. Why is there two tiers of justice? What happened to this country?
Yeah, it's a great story, Max. But let's try and bring it back to where we are. I agree with you. It is absolutely scandalous that no investigation has been mounted into what HSBC were doing in Mexico. The reason that in my view, the reason why no investigation has been mounted is because, first of all, the people, the authority whose duty it would be to mount that primary investigation, which is the Financial Services Authority, it doesn't have anybody in there who has the wit or the skill to be able to do that.
That's not a satisfactory answer, because what you're saying is that let's have in the UK a separate police force from people that are either corrupt, crooked, incompetent, shameless profiteers, and then write laws for that police force, because these laws don't apply to any code of civil behavior that anyone is familiar with going back hundreds of years of jurisprudence.
There's no reason in theory why the police could not and should not investigate this. The police have the skills, they have the ability to be able to do that. They're being prevented from doing that by the politicians and by the regime that exists to protect the city. That's why they're not being used to do this. There is a massive, great big wall that's been put up, a wall of regulations that around the city designed to protect the financial sector from being brought to justice over this very kind of thing. You know, some years ago, we did actually take on some very, very big major players. One of the, we had the Guinness case, and very soon after that, we had the Blue Arrow case. Now, the Blue Arrow case was a case full of the most blue-blooded blue bloods you can imagine. And they were investigated. And guess what? They were convicted, and they went down, and they were sentenced to imprisonment. And almost with indecent haste, they were allowed to appeal those verdicts, and they were acquitted. And the word, a friend of mine who was then in those days in the Serious Fraud Office rang me up, and he said to me, the word has come down from on high. There will never, ever be any more prosecutions against institutions like Blue Arrow. It's not going to happen. It's too embarrassing.
Okay, so the government is complicit in beheadings in Mexico, and they laugh about it, and that's absolutely unconscionable. They should resign immediately or walk off to Boris's plank. You know, Boris at his mayor's office here has a plank. They can top themselves ceremoniously and get rid of themselves from the public view. But just to be clear, we're not saying that the cop on the street is to be blamed for this. They have a job to do. They do their job. They can only do the job that they get handed to them from the higher ups. We're talking about the higher ups. Right. We're not talking about the cops on the street. And all the cops here in London that I've met been fantastic, but the system is effed up. Now, you recently submitted evidence to the Parliamentary Committee on Banking Standards, Rowan Davies. What did you say? What happened to your evidence? I understand it went missing from the public record.
Yeah, that was really weird. There was a call for evidence back in August of 2012, which is a standard practice. But whenever one of these committees is set up, they call for evidence from interested people. And I submitted my evidence, and I submitted evidence which said that in my judgment, the banking sector was behaving and demonstrating all the characteristics of organised crime. And I set out the reasons why I thought that, I set out the reasons why it was happening, and I set out reasons as to how it could be dealt with. Because that was what the committee was sitting on. Now, what normally happens is that your evidence gets accepted and it's recorded in a list of documents that have been accepted. And I kept going to the website to see where my evidence was, and it just wasn't showing up. And I rang them up and said, can you tell me what's happened to my report, please, my evidence? And they said, oh, that's funny, we don't seem to have received anything from you.
Right.
And I said, well, no, you have. Can you please go back and look again? And they went back and looked again, and they said, no, we have not received anything from you. So eventually, this just got into the too silly tray. And what I did was I actually wrote a letter to the chairman of the committee. And I sent him an email, and I said, look, I've submitted evidence. I think it's evidence that you might like to see. But every time I ask about it, I'm told they never received anything.
Right. Well, I had a similar experience involved in evidence that relating to the phone hacking scandal, the Murdoch phone hacking scandal, that magically disappeared in a similar way. But let's go forward. So down in Cyprus, people have had their bank accounts seized. People are kind of shocked by this. And now coming back to the UK, where people are depositing money to escape Cyprus, the question is, will they have their deposits stolen in a similar fashion by the same criminal banks? when they are going to collapse. Because, of course, in the UK, they're talking about recapitalizing the banks again. There's another major bailout coming, as I predicted there would be. But this time they're going to take deposits, I predict. Now, based on how it's set up currently and from where your point of view, how easy will it be for the criminal syndicates, HSBC, Barclays, Lloyds, Royal Bank of Scotland, to steal money from deposits here in the UK?
Well, I think a lot of that is going to depend on the way in which these bailouts are managed. I think we have to remember that whatever's going to happen here, we have to differentiate that from what's been going on in Cyprus. Because they
changed the laws to make it easier to steal money from people's deposits. Those law changes are being written by the banksters, by the people who like the IMF, the EU. They're writing the laws. So how hard would it be for them to simply say, whatever the legal framework is today, to come in and say, due to the emergency, we're rewriting the laws, we're going to seize your accounts?
In theory, it would not be difficult at all.
Okay, well, let's move on. So I think we're going to see where this is going. Well, let me ask you this. Based on what you see as a former cop on the street, detective, if you had a betting man, if you're down at Ladbrokes and you had to place a bet on this, if the similar situation occurred, another bailout of the banks in the UK, and what would be the probability of betting, what's the odds that the UK is going to rewrite laws and just take money from depositors?
I'm not a betting man, and I really don't have that ability. That's something I've never understood. My own feeling is I think it's unlikely that Her Majesty's government would start sequestering individuals' bank accounts at this stage. I still think they'll do it another way. They'll do it from the taxpayer.
Right. Well, that's taxpayer.
In many respects, it's exactly the same thing.
Or they bring in Mark Carney to debase the currency, have hyperinflation, which is the same thing.
Well, indeed.
Quantitative easing is a confiscation.
Exactly.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
So anyway, we're out of time. Rowan Bosworth-Davies, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
No, it's just a great pleasure, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and the fabulous Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank my guest, Rowan Bosworth-Davies. If you can find him on Twitter, you should look for him on Twitter. He's at Rowan Bosworth. He'll also be speaking at Manchester on April 4th. Go to his site to learn more. If you'd like to send us an email, please do so at kaiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.